As of patch 3.11, Path of Exile is nearing 1,000 unique collectible items, with patch 3.12 set to bring this total well over the 1,000 threshold on the 18th of September. What better time is there to collect them all? From the most dangerous boss fight and the grindiest grinds to secret vendor recipes, this is part 1 to a guide of a challenge I am dubbing the Singularity Challenge. In this part, we'll be covering all the items added to the Path of Exile core game. Before we get into the numbers, this guide is going to be under a few assumptions. Firstly, the objective is to complete a unique tab in Standard. 3 months of a league isn't enough time to collect every unique item in the game, so we'll have to merge it there all together after each league. Secondly, I'll be playing in solo self-found only. There's just something about the challenge of collecting every unique item in the game myself. While this definitely could be done in a trade league, and probably much faster as well, I'm up for the challenge of SSF. Thirdly, not really a condition to the challenge, but something to keep in mind for the guide. As GGG do not publish the drop rates for most items, most of the numbers in here are rough estimates, based on prior experience and community research. Please don't take every number in here to be factually correct. And lastly, as I did mention this was a challenge I'll be undertaking, I'll be streaming all of this on Twitch at twitch.tv/theprimordialtv, link in the description. Starting at September 18th, from the launch of Heist, I will be streaming just about every day. Come hang out if you want to see my progress. If streams aren't your thing, I'll be compiling videos of my progress from my streams into edited down videos for YouTube, so definitely subscribe for that. Now, let's get right into it, starting from the regular drop uniques and vendor recipes. Some of the most individually difficult to acquire uniques in the Path of Exile core game are what are called Tier 1 uniques. For the most part, these can drop anywhere in the endgame, but are just extremely rare. These are items such as Chevron's Wrappings, Comb's Heart, and Void Battery. Each of these items are extremely rare, and aside from their respective divination cards, they cannot be target farmed. For the most part, these should just drop naturally over the likely several months this challenge will take to complete. There are, however, a few core game uniques that do have some special conditions to drop. The first we'll look at is SKYFORTH's. Not only is it likely a tier 1 drop, but it can also only drop from level 84 monsters. That means only from rare monsters in tier 15 maps, and magic and rare monsters in tier 16 maps. It can also be acquired with a chance orb extremely rarely from any level of sorcerer's boots, or guaranteed with the trash to treasure prophecy. For this challenge, I'll be picking up every pair of white sorcerer's boots to try and chance them, as a natural SKYFORTH or the trash to treasure prophecy are extremely rare. Dusk Dawn is a staff not a lot of people know about, and even fewer have ever used. It's a combination of a wand and shield, the Shade of Solaris and the Light of Lunaris respectively. The problem here is that both components are quite rare, either tier 1 or tier 2 rarity. To make matters worse, after creating the Dusk Dawn, neither of the components will still count for the unique tab completion, and therefore will need to be collected again. Neither Dusk Dawn or its components have any specific divination cards, or any ways of drastically increasing the chances of finding them. So we're likely looking at several months of farming before we find all 4 pieces. Next up is Loreweave. The recipe for this unique was hidden from the community for some time, but it was discovered to be a full vendor screen of unique rings, 60 of them to be exact. This is especially difficult in solo self-found, as there is no way to target farm unique rings other than just playing the game. To make things worse, we need those rings for our own unique tab completion, so only duplicate unique rings will be put aside for the Loreweave recipe. On the other hand, Loreweave is an extremely powerful chess piece for SSF, one that we'll likely end up using at some point throughout the challenge anyway. Our next unique is actually the one that inspired me to take on this challenge. There's a lot of content in Path of Exile I've personally never tried, and likely never would unless I set myself the conditions in this challenge. The unique I'm talking about, of course, is ONI-GOROSHI. ONI-GOROSHI drops off Hillock in the Twilight Strand. The catch is, it's very rare and the chance scales with level, so you'll need to be around level 6 to 8 before even having a decent chance to find a version of Hillock with his sword. This can only be done on characters that haven't left the Twilight Strand, and typically takes 8 to 10 hours. For our trouble though, we get a 6-link sword from the start of the game that scales all the way to the end game. My strategy for ONI-GOROSHI is to get it out of the way first thing in Heist League, and then build a character with it that is able to complete the rest of the content in the game, and then specialise with other characters as needed. Well, that wraps it up for the hardest of the ordinary unique drops and recipes from the core game. In part 2, when we go over all the uniques added in each league, we will have much more incredibly rare items and some much harder recipes. For now though, the remainder of this video will be focusing on the uniques dropped exclusively by the hardest bosses in the game, starting with ATZIRI. Fortunately, both ATZIRI forms have been in the game for quite some time, so there's been quite a bit of research into her drop rates. ATZIRI's Promise is by far the most common at around 60%, then Duani's Invitation around 20%, ATZIRI's Step around 15%, and Duani's Catalyst around 5% of the time. Using probability, we can estimate that over 50 kills we would have a 92% chance to at least receive one Catalyst. Not too bad considering we have to farm her to gain access to Uber ATZIRI next. It should be noted, there's 3 variations of Duani's Invitation, one for each element. But there's only one slot in the unique tab, so we only need one. Typically, with unique items with multiple variations, there's only ever multiple slots if the 2D art for the item also changes between variations. We'll see a lot more of that later, and even more in part 2. Uber ATZIRI, as the name suggests, is the much more difficult version of the ATZIRI fight, however her rewards are much greater. Her loot table is quite similar to regular ATZIRI, with one item being by far the most common, and each item after increasing in rarity. The most common being the Vertex at roughly 50%, then ATZIRI's Splendor at 25%, ATZIRI's Disfavor at 20%, and then the rarest, ATZIRI's Acuity at 5%. The roughly 1 in 20 drop rate of Acuity means that over 20 runs, there's only a 64% chance that we receive one. Uber ATZIRI is the beginning to what will be a common trend throughout this video. Accessing her requires 4 different keys from her precursor, regular ATZIRI. Even if we assume we knock over all her uniques in those 50 runs, that'll only leave us with a handful of attempts for Uber ATZIRI. In short, we'll have to get really lucky and snag a quick Acuity along with her more common items. Or we'll be running quite a few more than 50 normal ATZIRIs. Shaper Guardians are our first set of bosses from the Atlas of World expansion, and are home to 8 unique items, 2 dropping from each. From what I can tell, with all the research I've done into other players' experiences, of the 2 unique items each Guardian can drop, one of them drops in approximately 1 in 10 kills, and the other looks to be around 1 in 50 kills. The easy drops are as following: the Brain Rattler from the Minotaur, Sliver Tongue from the Hydra, the Scourge from the Chimera, and finally the Razor of the Seventh Sun from the Phoenix. These aren't too difficult, especially since they're probably 5 times more common than the rarer drops we need to get. So those rare drops, however, are a different story. Some of these usually fetch many exalts in trade leagues and can be quite troublesome to farm. They are the Brass Dome from the Minotaur, Snake Pit from the Hydra, Obscurantis from the Chimera, and Eye of Innocence from the Phoenix. After the Guardian's fairly recent health pool buff, these are no pushover, especially the Minotaur, which can be quite difficult for builds without good single target. However, the difficulty of these bosses isn't where the challenge lies here, it's the accessibility. Ever since the map for these bosses were removed from the Atlas in the Conquerors of the Atlas expansion, the only way to access these maps are from the occasional Zana mission in high tier maps, and rare drops from your Awakening bonus. Each Guardian, of course, drops its respective fragment, which we'll be using for our next challenge. The Shaper, along with his precursors, the Guardians, share the same key difficulty for this challenge: accessibility. One run of the Shaper requires a fragment from each of his Guardians, leaving our runs few and far between. He's not without his rare loot either. Of the 5 unique items he can drop, 3 are quite rare, namely Dying Sun at around 10%, Starforge around 3%, and a Solstice Vigil around 3%. Using a probability tool I'll have linked down in the description, we can work out roughly how many runs it'll take to find his rarer items. Over 20 runs, we'd only have around a 45% chance to acquire all of his unique items. Increasing that to 50 runs would only put us at a 78% chance. Fortunately, or unfortunately perhaps, 50 is the average amount of times we would need to kill each of his Guardians for their own unique items. We're very much at the will of RNG here. We could get lucky and get them all in 5 runs, or do 50 runs and have nothing to show for it but boots and gloves. Either way, I expect this portion of the challenge to take perhaps a league or 2, depending on RNG. Also, Shaper drops half the keys we need to access the Uber Elder fight, which we'll discuss in a moment. There are a total of 8 unique items specific to the Elder Guardians. Unlike all other loot table drops, they're not specific to the boss, but instead the tile set the boss is fought in. This makes it even more difficult to farm them, as you cannot know which tile set you're going to get when you run an Elder Guardian map. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of data behind the drop rates of these, as there usually isn't a reason to farm them. From my experience, around 10% per kill sounds alright. You might notice the 9th item down at the bottom. That's ARBORIX, a combination of 2 of the other Guardian drops, the Bell Timber Blade and the Growerwood Shank. Meaning, as usual, we need 2 of each, 1 pair to create the ARBORIX, and 1 pair to complete their slots in the unique tab. Fortunately, I suppose, we're going to have to kill a lot of Elder Guardians anyway for the fragments to the Elder, and also later Uber Elder fights, so we should be able to pick up most of their drops on the way. The Elder, unfortunately, hasn't had much research into his drop rates, so this is just about purely speculation. However, he has another 7 items for us to collect. Of these, Blasphemous Grasp and a Cyclopean Coil are the most common. Then Nebulock, Shimmeron, and the Hope Shredder are each quite rare, probably around 5% each. The last of his drops, in Presence, is interesting as it drops as one of 5 variants, each corresponding to a damage type with a different icon. This is our first case of requiring multiple types of the same unique item, as each variant has its slot in the unique tab. On top of this, it's quite rare, probably around 10% chance, but that's just a guess. This is one of the parts of our grinds that will likely take us a few leagues to passively complete, as for every presence that drops, we're much less likely to receive one that we haven't acquired yet. Uber Elder is going to be a real challenge for us. He's still quite difficult, especially in solo self-found, and takes fragments from Shaper and Elder to attempt. Fortunately, we're farming both of these anyway, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. As I personally haven't fought Uber Elder enough to get an accurate idea of what his drop rates really are, I've used compilations of data from Reddit and the official forum to hopefully get a closer estimate. Mark of the Shaper and Elder probably around 30% each. Void Fletcher and Indigon are around 15% each. Void Forge is around 3%, Disintegrator around 3%, and the Eternity Shroud around 3%. Using these estimates, we can roughly assume it'll take at least 30 runs to get one of each of the drops from Uber Elder. No small feat at all. Remember, assuming perfect fragment distribution and good drop RNG, it's still 60 Shaper and 60 regular Elder kills. One thing I wanted to mention, people are wondering why I haven't brought up yet, are Watcher's Eyes. Even though they have several variations, we only need one, and it can be from normal Elder or Uber Elder. And we'll have several before we complete either one of those, so I didn't really feel like it was worth mentioning. All in all, as Uber Elder has 3 very rare drops, and is by far the hardest boss on this list to access, gathering all his drops will likely take us several months. The Conquerors have 8 unique items specific to them, and unlike most of the other bosses, these can drop from any one of them. The drop rates of these are also based off your awakening level, so having more watchstones socketed into the Atlas will speed up the time it takes to collect all of these. They aren't too uncommon, fortunately, with what I would assume to be a 5 to 10% drop rate at awakening level 8. We should be able to easily fetch all of these within the first couple months of the challenge. SIRUS, our last major boss in this video, actually has 4 loot tables, 2 of which we'll be focusing on. The first is his actual gear he can drop, and the second are his unique watchstones. While it's not really possible for a single person to gather enough data alone to estimate his drop rates, I've compiled a number of sources to come up with hopefully a decent guess at what the percentages at Awakening 8 may be. Fortunately, the only really rare item here is the Savior, at what I would estimate to be a 3 to 5% drop rate, somewhere around the same chance as Starforge from the Shaper. We'll also want to ensure we're taking him and the Conquerors on at Awakening level 8 to speed up our progress. The second drop table are his unique watchstones. They actually have their own tab in the unique tab. There isn't as much information on the drop rates of these as the rest of SIRUS's gear, but from my experience, you get a watchstone at least 50% of the time you kill SIRUS. There are different kinds, however, and they aren't all the same rarity. The prefix and suffix to map adding ones, Irresistible Temptation and Territories Unknown, are much more common than the rest, while Terror and Misinformation are much rarer. Misinformation is perhaps as rare as the Savior, as it's incredibly powerful for juicing up maps. This all might sound like a lot, but with at least SIRUS he is still part of the core mapping meta, unlike Shaper and Elder, which used to be, but are now much harder to access. So no matter what we're farming, as long as we're running maps, we're making progress towards SIRUS and his Conquerors. Well, that wraps up all the big grinds from the core game that I can find from my research. If there's anything you think I've missed, let me know down in the comments. All in all, I think the standouts here are the Dusk Dawn recipe for the amount of time it'll take to farm all the components. In Presence from the Elder because of its low drop rate several variations. And then Uber Elder as he has multiple rare drops, is not only a difficult fight, but even difficult to access many times. I believe aside from these, it's quite possible we can knock everything out from within our first league, so we can focus on the leagues of the past afterwards. In the second part of this guide, we'll be looking at every unique item added to Path of Exile from each and every league. This is where the challenge gets very difficult, so make sure you subscribe for that. It's going to be a long one. Also, as I mentioned at the start, all of this is going to be streamed on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/theprimordialtv. I'll also have a live on-screen unique canner I'll update with every new unique. So if you wanted to come hang out with me and see my progress live, drop a follow as new streams will be starting from the launch of Heist League on September 18. If you liked this video or learned anything, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 2 or any more of my upcoming content on the Singularity challenge.